Thank you very much. Welcome, welcome, welcome to everybody who is here at the White House, and welcome to everybody who is watching online on our live stream. Happy birthday to the ADA. How about that? And what's amazing, this is the 22nd birthday of the ADA, and the ADA is older than me. So, wow, it's, I wasn't even born when the ADA was passed. So, wow, it's great to be here considering the ADA is older than me. And it's great to be with all of you all on this historic anniversary for such a historic landmark civil rights bill. All of you all know what the ADA is about and what it stands for. And that is what this president, what this administration stands for as well. Equality of opportunity, dignity, and respect for everyone, for all Americans, for the 54 million Americans who live with disabilities across our country. And so we have a program for you today that I think is going to be very interesting and informative and enlightening. We have, starting off this morning, we have a panel discussion that's going to feature some of our top administration appointees who work on disability issues across the agencies. They're going to introduce themselves. We have representatives from HHS, from the Department of Transportation, from FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security, from the FCC, and did I get it? Oh, and from the Department of Education. So we're very excited. They're going to talk to you about some of the things that are going on in our administration, and probably most importantly, they're going to really try to dig down and talk to you about how some of the things that are going on are helping you all out in the cities and states and towns across this country, helping you on the ground in your everyday life, and not just policies and ideas from here in Washington, but things that are helping you on the ground. We're going to have that panel discussion go from about 8 to 8:45 or 8:50. Then we're going to have closing remarks from Senior Advisor to the President, Valerie Jarrett, who's going to do those remarks to close our event this morning. So we're very excited. There will be a lot of things that you'll see later on throughout the day from the White House and from the administration. A lot of things going on celebrating this very important anniversary. So I encourage you to kind of keep a lookout. For those of you all who are on my distribution list, look out for that. Check out whitehouse.gov, the front page for blogs and other very interesting information that's going to be disseminated today, and a lot of great information. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our esteemed panel to walk you through, and they're really smart people, so they can kind of moderate themselves. But let me turn it over to our panel. Thank you so much again for joining us today. We very much appreciate it. And happy birthday.
Thank you very much, Kareem. I'm Marcy Roth, and I'm the director of FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. Let's give Kareem another hand of applause for his incredible leadership. The work that you've done here at the White House, Kareem, has really had a sweeping impact across the country. And here we are on the 22nd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I will tell you that about 24 years ago, I had the opportunity early in my career to testify about discrimination against people with disabilities before Representative Major Owens up in Boston when the hearings were going on across the country. So it's especially exciting to me to be here today, 24 years after that first event, and now celebrating the 22nd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I think we're going to start with Richard, and each of us is going to take a few minutes and talk about some of our accomplishments. Richard, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about yourself and some of what's been happening at the Department of Transportation.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard DeVelder, and I'm the Senior Advisor for Accessible Transportation at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And basically my role, and I started in July of 2010, and my role is to advise the Secretary and the great staff at DOT to ensure that we're integrating accessibility into everything that we do. And our primary goal, and what we've really worked hard towards, is allowing people with disabilities the opportunity to be able to access public transportation and not have to be dependent on specialized services understanding there are those that are going to need specialized services to be able to get around the community, but we really want to make sure that, as I always say, that I can get on any bus or train that I want to, whenever I want to. And that's really the goal of what we're doing. So a couple of things that we've done recently in the last couple of years is we, in September of 2011, amended our ADA rule, and many people think of it as our rail rule because it really did focus on commuter, intercity, and high-speed rail, and the whole issue around boarding and the like. And our rule basically talks about the fact that our primary goal is level boarding, which means we want the platform to be level all the way across so that people don't have to be dependent on mobile lifts and personnel in order to get on and off a train car. And so we basically said in the rule that whether it's a new station or one that's being heavily renovated, the rule of level boarding goes into effect. And so we've been working really closely with Amtrak, and Amtrak has become a friend of ours in terms of the process and the policies that they've adopted internally to be able to take the rule and actually implement it appropriately. And then another thing that we've done is the administrator for the FTA, Peter Rogoff, committed funding around the issue of veterans and community living initiatives. So we have our partners in terms of HHS, Department of Labor, Veterans Administration, and so forth, where we focus funding around the country, and it's not starting new programs, but it's really providing funding to programs to expand the services that they're providing so that veterans and people with disabilities who want to access transportation in the community can actually get information, know where the transportation is, and have a good understanding. So we have what we call one-call centers and websites, so you can do it both electronically and by phone to be able to get an idea of what transportation services is available in your area and the services that you may need.
Thank you very much, Richard. I know you've been working very closely with us at FEMA. Do you want to take a minute and talk a little bit about transportation and where that fits in to the emergency management context? Because
Certainly.
you all have done a lot of work in that area.
Yes, we've been working a lot with Marcy and her staff, and really also around the country with not just the Homeland Security and the Emergency Management Offices, but also the Department of Transportations. Because there's oftentimes question as to how does transportation fit in with evacuations, and specifically how do we work to ensure that people with disabilities are able to actually be evacuated from the community. So we spend a lot of time providing guidance and also just going out and speaking to groups and at conferences to help people understand how you need to look at your total resources and the assets that are available to you, and that we shouldn't have to move in a direction where people have to pre-identify themselves all the time to get evacuation services, but to really understand that the service system is prepared to actually assist and work hand in hand with the emergency management and the offices to be able to do the evacuations.
Thank you, Richard. Next, we're going to ask Henry Claypool from the Department of Health and Human Services. Tell us a little bit, I know people would really like to hear about the Affordable Care Act, so tell us a little bit about some of your accomplishments and maybe focus a little on the Affordable Care Act.
Sure. So Marcy, if I take too much time, you will certainly cut me off. The Affordable Care Act is an expansive piece of legislation that really has profound effect on people with disabilities. But before I get to that, I'd like to give you a little bit of an introduction and share with you some recent exciting news at the Department of Health and Human Services. So I serve as Secretary Sebelius's Senior Advisor on Disability Policy, and I also serve as the Principal Deputy Administrator of a new agency inside of the department. The agency is called the Administration for Community Living, and the Secretary has a broad vision for how we can help this new agency position itself to really complement the healthcare delivery system in a manner that helps people with disabilities, older Americans, live in their communities and in their homes. Aging in place is critical for older Americans, and as we know, people with disabilities are really interested in living in the most integrated setting appropriate to their need. This new agency will really help HHS fulfill the vision of Olmsted, and also help Americans as they age make sure that they have the right services and supports so that they can live in their homes and in their community. So it's a very exciting time for us at HHS, And the Affordable Care Act has given us new tools to help further that goal. Just to quickly mention a few of the pieces inside of the Medicaid program, there are new options available to states to expand attendance services to help people live in their homes. There's a new benefit available under the Community First Choice option for states to, again, provide home and community-based services and supports to people with disabilities of all ages that are receiving services through the Medicaid program. One of the hallmarks of the legislation is the extension of the Money Follows the Person program, which helps people move from institutional settings into the community. It's a piece of legislation that was initiated in the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005 and shows up again in the Affordable Care Act, really demonstrating that this is a bipartisan issue of helping people with disabilities move from institutional settings to lead meaningful lives in the community. Those are a couple, and hopefully later on we'll get to talk a little bit more about an exciting partnership that we have with HUD.
Thank you very much. Talk a little bit, if you would, about some of the strengths and weaknesses in disability policy in the work that you're doing.
I think disability policy is still in some ways emerging. It's a challenge in some instances for disability policy to square or reconcile itself with the standards established in the Social Security Act, which really authorizes many of the benefits that people with disabilities, particularly those that have low incomes, rely on. And so as we work at HHS to administer a couple of those programs, namely Medicare and Medicaid, we find modest little disconnects between how the program is administered and the real desires and aspirations of people with disabilities. Specifically the Medicaid program, it's really a poverty program targeted at people with low incomes. As we know, many Americans either are not low income or aspire to work their way out of poverty. And we have modest tools to help us do that. Something like the Medicaid buy-in may be available in your state to help people with disabilities go to work and continue to receive services through the Medicaid program. But there are still issues that we need to continue to work on to square the vision of the ADA and the types of, and ensure that people have access to the types of services and supports that they need to go to work.
Thank you, Henry. Karen Pell-Strauss is with the FCC, Federal Communication Commission. Federal Communication Commission.
You got it.
And I'm going to ask Karen to talk a little bit about the accomplishments at the FCC and some of the work that they're doing there.
Thanks, Marcy. As Marcy said, I'm Karen Pelt-Strauss. I'm the Deputy Bureau Chief over at the Federal Communications Commission of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. This is the bureau at the FCC that oversees all of the disability rights policies throughout the agency. And we've been really fortunate over the last couple of years to implement something called the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, which was signed by President Obama in October of 2010. This act brings into the 21st century all of the laws focusing on communications access to telephone and to television. There were many laws in the 1980s and the 1990s focusing on captioning and telecommunications access, and this law says in the 21st century we had all these new technologies, internet and digital technologies, and we want to make sure that people with disabilities are not left behind. So the accomplishments that I'm going to talk about right now are focused on making sure that people with disabilities have access to all of the innovative and emerging communications technologies, and so that they can continue to be productive, independent, and active participants of society. Probably the cornerstone of this legislation is a section that's called the Advanced Communication Services section, which requires access to services that are like email, instant messaging, VoIP, voice over internet protocol services. Any of those services and the equipment used for those services must be accessible under the Act. And the Commission in October of 2011 issued rules implementing this that will go into effect in October of 2013. Also, one thing that you will all be excited about to hear is that just this past July, we launched and began implementation of our video description rules. And as you know, video description allows people who are blind and visually impaired to access television programming. It inserts narratives into the natural pauses of programs so that if not all of the program has an audio component, the blind person can know what's going on. So we're really excited about that because this is our second attempt to get these rules going. We issued them in the year 2000 and they were overturned by a court. And this act, which is nicknamed the CVAA, gave us the explicit authority to reinstate those rules. So that's really exciting. Just generally, the rules require about 4 hours of programming on the top broadcast networks and their local affiliates. So it's ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox. And also on the top 5 non-broadcasting entities like cable and satellite stations, including Disney, Nickelodeon, TBS, TNT, and USA. And it covers the 4 hours of primetime or children's programming. The next big thing that we did is, as you all know, there's captioning on TV. That's brought to you by the FCC again. It was initially in a piece of legislation that Congress passed in 1996. And over a pretty extended period, actually a 12-year implementation schedule, the FCC required increasing amounts of television programming to have closed captions, and then along came the internet. And as you know, all those programs started moving out to the internet, but there was nothing in the law saying that those programs had to be captioned when they moved over. So the CVAA fixed that, and we issued rules in January of 2012 that require that as of, again, there's another implementation schedule, but it's a much tighter one. So beginning September 30th, 2012, and extending for about 2 to 3 years, gradually, all of these television shows that are on television, when they move to the internet, if they had captions on television, they have to have captions on the internet. And again, that implementation is starting this coming September. And specifically, what's going to happen in September is all pre-recorded programs that aren't edited heavily, basically, substantially edited, will have to have captions on the internet. So you're going to start seeing that pretty quickly. And last, I don't want to hog the entire time, we've been doing a lot over there at the Commission. We have the National Deafblind Program, Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program, which we are so incredibly proud of because this is a constituency that truly has not gotten the benefits of many of the previous communications laws. This new program, again, required by the CVAA, sets aside $10 million from our Telecommunications Relay Service Fund for the distribution of equipment to be used by low-income people who are deaf-blind to access telecommunications and advanced communication services. And I'm proud to say that the way we have drafted our rules, it does not have to be assistive equipment, it can be off-the-shelf equipment, it can be hardware, software, apps. We are trying to enter the 21st century, and we recognize that you cannot pigeonhole the disability community. We want these people to have the same kinds of devices that everybody else has. We've launched this as well. We launched it just recently, July 1st. It was a big day for us. And again, it's exciting because we feel that July is the ADA anniversary, so we're happy to launch these 2 programs, the video description and the National Deafblind Program in July. And so 50 states, 53 entities actually, the 50 states plus 3 territories have all been empowered to begin distributing this equipment, and they are already starting to do so. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Karen. So what's next? You have a lot going on. What's next?
Okay, I'm going to try, I'll be quick. Okay, what's next is, one of the things that I didn't mention is that one of the laws that we passed also requires, well, let me back up. In the past, televisions with screens over at least 13 inches had to have the capability of passing through captions. Well, now we're watching television on all kinds of devices, on our cell phones, on our tablets, on different sizes of TVs. Our rules require now that as of January 2014, those types of devices also have to pass through captions. But we still have coming other rules on equipment, video equipment for people who are blind and visually impaired. Making sure that the user interfaces, being able to change the channel, select a program from a menu, making sure that they're all accessible, making sure that emergency information that's provided to everyone else is accessible in an audio format to people who are blind, making sure that video description can reach viewers, because right now it's a little bit tricky with digital televisions. And so that's pretty big. We have a lot ahead of us as well. And then last, oh, actually two more, sorry. Internet browsers on mobile phones are going to have to be accessible to people who are blind and visually impaired. And finally, emergency access to 911. We're all shifting to a next generation type of system where we're going to be able to send video and data and text to 911. We already have an open proceeding on that, and it's I'm proud to say that the CBAA is a huge part of that proceeding, that the proceeding affects everybody's access to 911, but people with disabilities are a central component of that proceeding. That's it.
Thank you, Karen. We're all really excited about the progress that we've been able to make, and so Karen, your excitement over all of these things is something I think we all share. Melody Musgrove is with the Department of Education, and we're going to ask Melody to talk a little bit about what's happening at the Department of Education, at OSERS, OSEP, and a little bit about your accomplishments.
Thank you. I'm Melody Musgrove, Director of the Office of Special Education Programs, and it's really a great pleasure to be here today, and I don't want to overlook the significance of this event being here today at the White House. I think it speaks so clearly to the President Obama, and to the administration's commitment to people with disabilities, to advancing the rights of people with disabilities, including children. And I think that it is so significant. My dad was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was a senior in high school. He passed away last year at the age of 85. So he lived a very long life, a very meaningful life, and most of my adult life with significant disabilities, physical disabilities. And of course, when the ADA was put in place, it really changed our lives as a family, and it changed his life and allowed him to be able to continue to be involved in his community as he had always been throughout my life. So I saw firsthand the changes that took place because of the ADA and allowing him to be able to be more involved, to be able to do the things that he loved to do. The foundational principle of Secretary Arne Duncan's work with us at the Department of Education is that when we say all children, we truly mean all children, which means that the work of special education and its meaning for children with disabilities has been integrated throughout all the programs of the Department of Education. We actually have a disability strategy that addresses how children with disabilities will be addressed throughout the department, throughout the different offices, and in the programs that we administer. For instance, you saw in the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge that children with disabilities in our early intervention, early learning programs were specifically mentioned as part of the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge. Of course, we issued the long-awaited regulations for early intervention in our Part C program this year to enable quality services, better quality services for our over 350,000 infants and toddlers who receive very, very critical services in terms of early intervention to help them be prepared to begin school. We also published a resource guide on restraint and seclusion this year, and that resource guide provided some helpful information to states and school districts that are trying to develop policies to prevent the need for restraint and seclusion in our schools, and to implement positive interventions and supports on a school-wide basis throughout the schools so that there would not be a need for the practices of restraint and seclusion. Of course, in June of 2010, we jointly with the Department of Justice issued a Dear Colleague letter that addresses improving e-reader accessibility. And I don't want to take too much time, but we also are proud of the work that we've done around improving accessible instructional materials for students with print disabilities, as well as the recent Dear Colleague letter on improving the instructional math materials for students with print disabilities. So we are very busy, and it's a great time to be in special education because, you know, for many years we have said if we could just get more involvement throughout general education, because most students with disabilities are served by general education. And so we have that collaboration now, and we are advancing the policies and the rights of children with disabilities and their families to ensure that they get the opportunity to access the American dream.
Thank you, Melody. I know we all think about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act when we talk about the Department of Education's work. What does the ADA mean to you, to the department, and today's celebration?
Yeah, well, it is, you know, obviously it is very important. As I said, I remember, you know, when we first started implementing some of the provisions of the ADA, and it means that students with disabilities also can be integrated and involved in their schools, in their communities, that they have the opportunity to be engaged in the activities that are of interest to them, and that they are a full part of the education community in their school, to be with their friends, to be a full participant in the activities of their schools. So it is so important. You know, I do remember when I was growing up of the students with disabilities who, you know, had to have all of their classes in a certain place because they were not able to access the second floor of the school, or, you know, for the many ways that they really were discriminated against. And I don't think we can overstate the importance of the ADA in ensuring that students with disabilities are treated properly and get the respect and dignity that they deserve and are not discriminated against. So it's very important to us in the Department of Education.
Thank you. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at FEMA. We've been busy. There have been quite a lot of activity across the country. Many of you, I think, have been affected by some of the recent, you know, whether it's been earthquakes or tornadoes or storms and power outages. It's been a very busy time for us at FEMA. It's a great honor and privilege to be here today, and we've made some pretty significant progress in disability inclusive emergency management over the past 3 years that I've had the opportunity to be at FEMA. President Obama, Secretary Napolitano, and Administrator Fugate all share a deep commitment to engaging the whole community. We at FEMA know that FEMA is not the team, we're just part of the team. And so most of our work has been focusing on engaging everyone as partners in emergency management. And that means making sure that people with disabilities are fully included as partners in preparedness, in response, in recovery, and in mitigation. We, over the past couple of years, stood up the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. And we brought on board disability integration specialists in each of the 10 regions across the country. Our disability integration specialists have deployed to over 35 disasters in the past year. And we've been able to provide support to states so that they have the tools and the resources so we can provide guidance to assist states and local communities to be able to meet the needs of the whole community, inclusive of the access and functional needs of children and adults with disabilities. A couple of our recent accomplishments that I'm excited about, we've brought together folks from across the country for a couple of conferences called Getting Real, where we've had people talking about promising practices in inclusive emergency management, and we've made lots of videos available to folks who don't quite understand how this inclusive stuff works. So we've made those available on our website. Just a few weeks ago, we announced contracts that we now have in place. If states need assistance in providing personal assistance services to people with disabilities who are in general population shelters, who've had to evacuate and are in either general population shelters or in transitional housing after a disaster, we now have contracts in place that the state can ask for personal assistance service providers to come in, and we can put folks on the ground in 24 hours. We're pretty excited about the ability to do that, because that means that people with disabilities can continue to maintain their health, their safety, and their independence after what is, for most people, one of the most catastrophic events of their life. Under President Obama's leadership, we're all working very hard on what's called PPD 8, Presidential Policy Directive Number 8, and the National Preparedness Goal. So we've had great involvement from the disability community, and really this is key to what we're doing. We don't want to be planning for people with disabilities. We want to be planning with people with disabilities. And so we've really appreciated the very active involvement of so many people with disabilities, so many organizations, service providers, advocacy organizations, and we really look forward to more of that kind of involvement because we really do believe in the disability community adage, nothing about us without us. So at FEMA, we're excited about the future and excited about working together with the disability community. We're deeply committed to the ADA and to making sure that physical, programmatic, and communication access is really available to people at every step before disasters, during, and then in their recovery. So that's a little bit about what we've been doing at FEMA. And I think now we have an opportunity for some questions from the audience that's here in the room. So if you would, I'm hoping that we have a microphone.
Well, Marcy, while they're preparing for their questions, maybe I can just expand a little bit on the Affordable Care Act, because we'd be remiss if we didn't really acknowledge what happened when the Affordable Care Act passed Congress and the President signed it into law. There really was one of the last vestiges of discrimination against people with disabilities that was removed. That was access to private insurance markets. The use by insurance companies of pre-existing conditions to deny insurance products to people with disabilities really was significant. And taking that away from insurance companies and allowing people with disabilities to now go out in the private market as of 2014 and purchase a product that is going to provide the basic health care that they need really is a significant accomplishment. It's something that we didn't get to when the ADA was signed into law, but now the Affordable Care Act comes along and delivers something that's really essential, and that's access to basic health care for people with disabilities in the private markets.
Henry, I will jump in and talk a little bit more about kind of where we're headed and what's been going on in special education in particular. You know, special education has always been fraught with extensive legal protections, legal compliance requirements, and those are very important. And they were put in place for a reason, and we are very careful about making sure that we see that those are implemented. But compliance alone is not enough. We have seen that legal compliance in and of itself has not necessarily translated into better educational outcomes for children with disabilities. So now we are really focusing on how do we build a system that supports states and local school districts in improving the educational outcomes of children. How do we hold ourselves and our country accountable for whether or not children with disabilities are learning to read and do math and graduate from high school and are being prepared for life as an adult. And so secondary transition is a very important aspect of the work that we are doing. This year there was a secondary transition conference where many agencies and individuals came together to talk about what role do we all play in ensuring that students with disabilities effectively transition to either post-secondary employment or education or whatever it is that they want for their lives so they can live the lives that they have dreamed. So again, we are adamant about protecting those provisions that have been put in place in many years past for IDEA and also for ADA, but how do those translate into improving the life outcomes of students with disabilities? And that's a big part of the work that we are doing now.
Thank you, Melody. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to ask folks to come raise your hand if you have a question I'll have you come up and speak into the microphone. Come on up. I see our first hand. Come on up, and I'm going to turn the microphone around to the table. You're just about here. Okay. I'm going to turn the microphone around.
There you go.
Thank you very much. John Perret with National Federation of the Blind. I appreciate everyone being here. Thank you. Everyone's talk was so informative. My question would be more education question, maybe a little bit two-part. One, not enough blind people are learning Braille. Can you comment maybe more on how we could improve Braille literacy for children, and also plans for making sure that the Common Core standard tests, the assessment tests, will be accessible to all people with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you. Those are great questions. First of all, we are aware of the concerns around Braille literacy for children who have vision impairments and blindness. And we think that we have policies in place that promote Braille instruction, but we do want to clarify those and are in the process of developing a Dear Colleague letter to go to the field to remind our educators of the responsibility to ensure that students who need Braille, or that they have Braille instruction. And I just forgot the second part of your question. I apologize. Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. I completely lost my train of thought there. The Common Core standards, of course, we have consortia that are working on the next generation of assessments. Our goal is to ensure that all students have accessible assessments that enable them to participate in the grade level assessment or the appropriate assessment for them. And our goal is to have those assessments available for all students in 2014. This is a very ambitious timeline, and a great deal of work is going into those, and they are very aware, the people that are doing the work, that it is critical and it is required that all students can participate in the assessments and access the material. So again, we are constantly reminding them of that, and I'm confident that students who are blind will have accessible assessments.
Thank you. Next question. Thank you. Come on up. Would you rather go to the podium?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure it's accessible to everybody.
Is it on? Yeah. All right. Thanks. I'm wondering. My name. Oh, okay. My name is Adam Berman. I'm with Autism Speaks, and this is a question I think a lot of students with disabilities face. Whether it doesn't really permeates through all students with disabilities, but I remember some personal experiences way back through my public school education years, and there were a number of bullying incidences, and I've seen the way that it's usually taken care of. It's usually very physical, the nature that people deal with it, or it can be even worse, and it infests the person with the disability's life and really hurts the quality of life. I'm wondering, I've been hearing that there's been a number of considerations legally and system-wide about how to deal with bullying, and I'm wondering how you're going to measure the efficacy and the effectiveness of such anti-bullying laws.
Thank you. Again, a great issue and a great question, and a very hot topic that we are all concerned about. Of course, in 2010, the Office for Civil Rights issued a Dear Colleague letter to support educators in combating bullying in the schools. We know that students with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by bullying. We are also in the process of developing a letter to go to the schools, reminding them of the LRE, least restrictive environment requirements under IDEA, that it would be inappropriate to remove a student with a disability to a more restrictive setting in order to protect them from bullying. We should protect the students in their least restrictive environment. We also, for the first time this year, had the Civil Rights Data Collection, which is a very rich data system of collecting data on suspension and expulsion, on a number of different things in the school community. Now, it will not actually collect data. It does not collect data on bullying specifically, because that is not something that is reported. That's a very flimsy definition, to be honest. But we can track whether or not students with disabilities are being moved, and then dig deeper into why those things are happening. And we think this is very important. I think that the richness of the data collection and the civil rights data, as well as in our data that we collect in the Office of Special Education Programs, enables us to get a good idea of how we are, how effectively we are dealing with some of the issues that disproportionately impact students with disabilities, including bullying, suspension and expulsion, and and behavior issues.
I'll give you a choice, either this microphone or the podium.
Hi, good morning. My name is Cynthia Overton. I'm with American Institutes for Research. First of all, thank you so much to all of the panelists for all the important work that you do to enhance the lives of people with disabilities. I was curious if you could just speak a little bit more to some of the collaborative initiatives that you have across federal agencies to address issues of concern to people with disabilities.
Could I pick up on that, Marcy? I've been dying to highlight the President's Year of Community Living, one of the signature disability initiatives he launched when he came into office. It had two parts. It really called for the Department of Justice to reinvigorate its Olmstead enforcement efforts. And as we know, that's led to quite a lot of work on behalf of the Department of Justice with states to ensure that they're operating their Medicaid programs in a manner that allows people with disabilities to be served in the most integrated setting. So Department of Justice, if you go to their website, you can find an awful lot more out about that. The other piece of the Year of Community Living was a robust partnership between Secretary Sebelius at HHS and Secretary Donovan at HUD. And it really was targeted at addressing one of the barriers that states have found in helping people move from institutional settings into the community. And that's been the lack of accessible and affordable housing. So the secretaries have gone about this in a very systematic fashion. Initially, there was the designation of 1,000 vouchers that were specifically to be used by individuals that were making the transition from an institution into the community. Those vouchers were coordinated with resources from the Money Follows the Person program so that you had both the housing and the services to live in the community. Well, why is this important? Let me share a story with you. There's a woman, I believe her name is Sharon, and she lives in Maryland. She was struck by a car and gravely injured. The injuries resulted in paralysis and institutionalization. The only place she could find services was in a nursing home. This separated her from her family. She was no longer able to care for her children. This, as you might imagine, really was heart-wrenching for her. Through the Money Follows the Person program and one of the vouchers that were designated to be used in this collaboration, she was able to make a transition from a nursing home back to her community, where she can now provide the love and care for her two children in a home-based setting and no longer has to live in an institution. She's now pursuing some job training, and hopefully soon we'll have more stories to share about how far Sharon has taken her life. So that's just an example of how the President's leadership has both brought us this far and I think given us a vision for more to come.
Thank you, Henry. And I want to share a couple of examples of collaboration at FEMA. Across the federal family, Administrator Fugate chairs the Interagency Coordinating Council on Emergency Preparedness and Individuals with Disabilities, which has 25 federal members. We also have a disability working group, which many of my colleagues at FEMA participate in our disability working group. We also invite folks from across the federal government to participate in that. And I think one of our most important collaborations is in fact with the community. For example, our Integrated Public Alerts and Warning System team brings in folks on a quarterly basis to talk about alerts and warnings issues. Our disability integration specialists, before, during, and after disasters, bring the community together to make sure that the voice of the disability community is a true and meaningful part of the team at the table. So those would be some examples at FEMA.
And in transportation, we have a formal body that actually exists, and it's Coordinating Council for Access and Mobility. And many of the federal agencies are part of that. Secretary LaHood is the chair. And much of the work obviously gets done at the staff level. And so I mentioned earlier the Veterans Transportation and Community Living Initiative. And that was federal agencies coming together. As I mentioned, HHS, labor put money into this, and Veterans Administration, so that we could focus on veterans and the whole community living initiative that the president has for us.
And we at the FCC also, I mentioned before, the efforts to ensure that people with disabilities have access to next generation 911. To facilitate that effort, we developed an Emergency Access Advisory Committee on which we have members from the Department of Transportation, FEMA, the Department of Justice, and various other stakeholders, industry and consumers, and we work collaboratively to make sure that people with disabilities are going to have reliable and interoperable access to 911 services. In addition, some of our other work overlaps with the ADA. For example, I mentioned before that we have requirements for access to television programs that are shown on the internet. Well, the Department of Justice, as you know, implements Title III of the ADA, which also covers some web content. So we're in constant collaboration and discussion with attorneys and others from the Department of Justice to make sure that our rules are consistent with one another.
And very quickly, Marcy, the Promise Initiative is an interagency initiative that the President has really strongly supported. And it's a new grant program that will be available in 2013. The planning is taking place now to facilitate better outcomes for students who are ages 14 to 18 and receiving supplemental security income, or SSI. So how do we improve the educational and post-secondary outcomes of that population of students? And we're really looking forward to great things out of that program that will be available in 2013.
Thank you, everybody. Come on up, our next question, please.
My name is David Egan, and I represent an organization called Special Olympics International with a great friend, Ashley Counts, who's accompanying me. My question is, how is intellectual disabilities represented in the President's agenda of the ADA? Thank you.
I might be able to take on part of that question. We're very pleased at HHS in the creation of the new Administration for Community Living to really include intellectual disabilities as part of our new agency. Many may know of the President's Committee on Intellectual Disabilities. It is really a vital part of our new organization, and it exists and operates with the Administration on Developmental Disabilities. So we really have a very clear focus at HHS on the needs of people with intellectual disabilities, and it's anchored in our Administration for Community Living. So we rely on the committee for many of the issues that the intellectual disabilities community is facing.
And Kareem?
Yeah. If the panel doesn't mind, I'll take part of that question. I'll answer part of that question. Others can add if they'd like. One of the things that I think that we're all very proud of is the federal government's increasing commitment on with the Project Search initiative. For those of you who don't know, Project Search is formed to help persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities gain integrated employment. And we've started off with a couple of agencies. Now we've expanded to more. We've had Department of Education, Department of Labor, HHS, I think the Department of Interior, and I know OPM is working on getting involved. So we're expanding that program, and out of that program, at least with the federal government, we've had quite a few persons get integrated employment both inside and outside the federal government. And so The idea, obviously, behind the ADA is to integrate folks into our society on an equal basis, and that program has been very successful from the federal government standpoint in helping us do that for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Thank you, Kareem. I think we have time for another couple of questions. Yes.
Hello there. My name is Angel Lopez. I'm with the University of Central Florida, but I've been here all summer here in Washington, D.C. at the Council for Exceptional Children. I just had a quick question. There are more and more children living in poverty, and the disparity in educational outcomes and the involvement with juvenile justice and law enforcement can be correlated to socioeconomic levels. Most of these children are minorities, and many of these young men and young women are children with disabilities. Are there any initiatives in place to reduce recidivism rates and increase access to programs for these youth?
Yeah, thank you. The answer is yes, and that is a tremendous issue, and it is complex in being able to address that issue. But first of all, we have some model demonstration programs that are on the transition of youth with disabilities back to their neighborhood schools. We know that the recidivism rate has traditionally been very high, and we do know a lot, although the research is not incredibly strong on that transition back to their neighborhood schools. So we know that there are some models that are effective, and how do we get more information about those, and how should they be implemented in that time of transition back to the neighborhood school? That's one thing. The second thing is continuing to insist on disaggregated data. Unless we really know what the performance of students is, and what is happening with them and where they are in their educational progress, then it's very hard for us to understand how to address some of those problems. So continuing to insist on the disaggregation of data by a number of different variables, including disability, including, of course, race and poverty, and a number of things that we know can impact the educational outcomes of children, particularly children with disabilities. So I think as we move to a system of accountability in special education that is more results focused, that enables us to be able to dig deeper into the reasons why students are not performing and are not achieving grade level competency for those who, and the vast majority of children we know can do that. And so that enables us to continue to dig deeper and to help support states as they improve the educational outcomes for students with disabilities.
Thank you, Melody. I think we still do have some time for a couple more questions.
Can I just add, I have one
Karen.
comment on the last question. The Federal Communications Commission also has a program called Connect to Compete, which allows for people with actually families that are low income with children to get low cost broadband and broadband devices. And the goal there is to make sure that young people, young students that are in need of access to broadband technology have that access so that they could succeed in schools.
Thank you, Karen. Come on up.
Hi, I'm Dara Baldwin. I'm with the National Council on Independent Living. Thank you for this panel. I have two questions. One is in reference for FEMA. Hi, Marcy. In reference to especially what happened last Friday. I know we have a lot of emergency programs to get people with disabilities out of natural disasters, but event disasters. How are we working on that, especially EMS, EMT people, and how they handle those accidents? The stage last year that went down in Indiana, again, how are we helping people? We're getting people with disabilities to these events, but when things happen, getting them out has been an issue and a problem. And my second question, as a person of color, is in reference to how are we reaching out to the communities of color for people with disabilities and working with all of these departments and getting those people more involved in this. There are people who are people of color and of diverse backgrounds who are not here at this table, and we need to see them.
Thank you, and those are great questions. I'll answer the first one, and then maybe several of us can join in on the second. I think the key to making sure that when whether it's a natural disaster or whether it's a man-made disaster. The real key is for people with disabilities to be actively participating in preparedness. We have some great programs around the country. Many of our independent living centers are really taking a lead on working on preparedness programs. There's some great programs. One of our previous questioners was asking about how people with intellectual disabilities are involved. Some great programs where people with intellectual disabilities are preparing themselves and their community. It's really key that folks are working with those first responders to help them to understand not that people with disabilities are vulnerable or that our needs are special, but rather that we need access, that we need access to information. Information has to be accessible in order for it to be actionable. People need to be in physically accessible environments. We need to make sure that people see themselves as part of the emergency management equation, and that people with disabilities get involved, get involved in career opportunities, so that first responders aren't just people who don't have disabilities, but really that the whole community is reflected in our first responder community. So many of those things help. There's some great programs around the country where disability community, people who are involved in the disability community are training first responders about how to assist somebody after an accident or a disaster so that they don't damage equipment unnecessarily. That's a great opportunity because, as we all know, sometimes replacement of equipment can take a very long time. Sometimes equipment's going to be destroyed, nothing you can do about that. But if you're extricating somebody from a vehicle, maybe not destroying that vehicle in the process or not destroying that individual's wheelchair. Those would be some of the kinds of things that we're working on at FEMA. In terms of involving the whole community, it requires that we make the effort to not only say that everybody has a place at the table, but to make sure that we're reaching out in ways that really demonstrates, means for us at FEMA that our workforce looks like the people we serve. It means that we're doing the kinds of things that make it possible for people to be able to provide valuable and valued input. And it means not thinking in terms of special needs anymore, but thinking in terms of access and functional needs. And so people of color, people with disabilities, people from a variety of groups who may have previously been unserved or underserved see themselves as part of the team.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcy. I'm going to take a moment to answer that last question, and then we're going to move right into our speaker. But I just want to say that on the diversity standpoint, this president is very committed to diversity, and we want diverse groups within the disability community to be at the table. I mean, I think if you look at the president's appointments, myself as an African American, we have Kathy Martinez, who is a Latina, LGBT representative. We obviously have lots of women with disabilities and represented. We have Carmen Jones, who is an African American with a disability in our administration. So this president has tried to make sure that diversity within the disability community is represented, and we welcome those who want to talk about those issues and have a conversation about broader diversity. I had that conversation with lots of people, so I think it's a good question, and it's something we're certainly committed to talking about and working on. So why don't we give our panel a great big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate them. So as I mentioned, is our closing speaker, a woman who really needs no introduction, but I'll take 1 second just to say that Valerie is the senior advisor to President Obama and the head of the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs and Office of Public Engagement, and is my boss. And I can tell you that as I work through the issues for the president on disability policy and work with all of the agencies and try to work to coordinate policy, I can tell you that there's no stronger voice and advocate inside this building when we're trying to work through things, when we're trying to get results and work through things than Valerie. And she has been a staunch supporter of people with disabilities. She has moved many of the initiatives that she's going to talk about and that you've heard about today. She has supported those and made sure that they got done because they were things that the president wanted to get done, and you need voices and you need leaders like Valerie. So it's my pleasure to introduce the Senior Advisor to President Obama, Ms. Valerie Jarrett.
Thank you, Kareem. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We are just delighted to have you here in the White House. And on behalf of President Obama, I want to say what a pleasure it is to see all of you sitting here in this room today, as well as everyone who's watching, tuning in online. For those of you on Twitter, I have to say I just joined Twitter not that long ago, so my handle, VJ44, and we encourage everyone to tweet out about this very, very important celebration. It is an honor to be celebrating the American with Disabilities Act. As you all know, 22 years ago today, President George H.W. Bush signed into law one of the most comprehensive civil rights bills in our history. It was a huge step forward for tens of millions of Americans with disabilities. And it only happened because of the hard, persistent, sustained efforts of advocates such as you. So how about give yourself a round of applause? Yes, absolutely. Over decades, you marched, you organized, and you spoke out. You refused to be treated as second-class citizens, which makes us all proud. You refuse to accept indifference or inaction by your government, and you raise the awareness for your fellow Americans. And ultimately, day by day, neighbor by neighbor, law by law, you changed America. Today, as we celebrate this landmark legislation, let us begin by reminding ourselves of the commitment to those core American values: equality, fair play, and unrestricted opportunity. I learned how important laws that protect people with disabilities were at the very, very beginning of my career before the ADA was passed. After my first year in law school in 1979, oh, come on, you can say I don't possibly look like I graduated in 1979, painfully long time ago. I had a summer internship at the Legal Advocacy Service. The Legal Advocacy Service was affiliated with the Legal Assistance Foundation in Chicago, and we provided free legal services to people whose legal issues were connected to their disability. Many of our clients were parents of children with disabilities who lived in schools that were refusing to follow the Illinois law that required children with disabilities to be placed in the least restrictive environment. The schools had failed to give children the opportunity that they deserve. And the parents simply wanted what everyone wants for their kids: to be treated fairly, to be treated equally. I spent the summer sitting around kitchen tables and in living rooms listening to the parents and children describe their frustration that such an important law designed to help every child reach his or her full potential was being deliberately ignored. They shared their hopes and their dreams, and of course, their hopes and the dreams for their children were the same as my parents were for me. That if they were willing to work hard, they should get a fair shot. Many days I would go home in tears because of the blatant injustice. But I also was profoundly inspired because the parents and children were steadfastly determined to fight for what they knew the law required, but also because they were fighting for what was right. When I looked into their eyes, I did not see weakness. I saw strength. I've never forgotten those families. They still motivate me each and every day, all these many years later, to fight for justice. All of you and millions more across the country have stories like their stories. Stories of wanting to be defined by your potential, not defined by your limits. Stories of making your voices heard so that you could help our country tear down those barriers that remain on the road to equality. Your stories inspire us all. And they inspire President Obama. He stands with you, he's fighting with you, and he is committed to ensuring that we realize the full promise of ADA. That's why, it's okay, you can clap, I saw you start to clap. It's all right, we can interact here. It's a celebration. That's why we have ramped up support for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and early intervention so that children with disabilities are getting evaluated earlier and entering schools ready to learn. That's why we have updated the ADA regulations so that millions are able to access all that our country has to offer on an equal basis. And that's why we are working hard to provide opportunities to thousands of blind entrepreneurs so that their idea can turn into a reality and a thriving business. I'm also proud to update you on the President's executive order to make the federal government a model employer that he signed on the 20th anniversary of the ADA 2 years ago. Many of you were with us. It was a hot day outside on the South Lawn. I remember it well. Well, yesterday, the Office of Personnel Management released a report on the executive order. The report has some good news. For FY 2011, after the President signed the executive order, new hires of persons with disabilities rose from 10.3% to 14.7%. That's real progress. In total, in FY 2011, the federal government hired 18,738 people with disabilities. This means that we're very close to being on track to fulfill the President's commitment. We're also seeing increases in usage of Schedule A, which is the non-competitive authority used to hire people with disabilities. More persons with targeted disabilities are also being hired. We have more people with disabilities in the federal service, both in numbers and by percentage, at any time since the ADA was passed. And this importantly includes our veterans with disabilities who are returning from serving our country. The President is focused on helping them find employment along with the First Lady and Dr. Biden. They have sacrificed so much for us. Isn't the very least we owe them to find a job when they return home? But there is more work to do. We still need to do a better job of hiring people with disabilities, with targeted disabilities, and to reach the President's goal. But our resolve and our commitment remains steadfast. We're sharing best practices with the National Governors Association, led by Governor Markell, who was in just last week visiting with us. The governor has made it a priority to hire people with disabilities in his administration and put it at the top of the agenda for the National Governors Association. And so we commend his leadership and look forward to partnering with him. We've also focused on making sure that people have the support to live in their own communities with dignity and with respect. The Department of Justice has been involved in more than 40 Olmstead matters in 25 states, leading to thousands of people with disabilities being able to transition into the community. HUD has also been hard at work under Secretary Donovan. They've issued thousands of new housing vouchers and just recently provided more than $85 million in assistance, which will lead to housing for nearly 3,000 people with disabilities. And when you told the President how much Medicaid mattered and your voices were loud, he fought to protect Medicaid, and he's going to continue to fight each and every day for each and every one of you. So today, as we celebrate the ADA, we must also commit ourselves anew to the pledge for equality. Unfortunately, there are some in Congress who have made it clear that they hold a different view when it comes to programs that support men and women with disabilities. The Ryan Republican budget would make deep and drastic cuts in both programs and in services, the ones that we care so deeply about. It would cut millions of dollars from Medicaid. It would cut millions of dollars from education and drain the Office of Special Education. It would cut millions of dollars from rental assistance programs that ease the transition into accessible housing. and it would make drastic effects on our healthcare, our research, emergency preparedness, and so many things that we rely upon. Under the Affordable Care Act, which was a tremendous, tremendous landmark accomplishment that the President just mentioned last night at the Urban League, already we have millions of people around the country, both seniors and disabled, who received already over an average of $600 to help pay for their prescription drugs. Many, many other critical benefits are in the Affordable Care Act that are helping each and every day. The cuts that the Ryan budget proposes, the President knows that you can't afford. But you know what else? Our country can't afford those cuts. And although we have made great strides for people with disabilities, we have much work to do. And the President is eager and absolutely committed to join hands with you in forging and leading the way. So I want to close by thanking each of you for everything that you do each and every day, for all the work that you have done, but also for all the hard work that lies ahead. Please keep making your voices heard. Keep fighting for what we know is right. Keep demanding nothing short of equality for all. And keep helping us build a better America. Congratulations, and let's celebrate. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Valerie. We appreciate it. And we thank all of you all for joining us both here at the White House and for joining us in your homes and your businesses in the cities and states and towns and counties across the country. This is an important day. There are a lot of programs here in Washington, D.C., but we know that there are a lot of programs out there in America all around the country. And so we encourage you to observe this day, celebrate it, and let us recommit to continuing the fight for equality that the ADA established some 22 years ago today. Thank you very much, and have a great day.